teacher tries to humiliate Blue Ivy Carter in class, but when Beyoncé shows up, the woman is left speechless. Subscribe to the channel and drop a comment. Where in the world are you watching from? The morning sun slipped through the light curtains of the Carter home, painting the wooden floors in soft golden tones. In the background, an old Beyoncé track spun gently from a record player in the corner. It was one of Blue Ivy's favorites, comforting, familiar, but even that couldn't quiet the nerves twisting in her stomach. Today was her first day at a new school. New hallways, new faces, and a new teacher. Blue sat at the table, stirring her cereal more than eating it, while her younger siblings, Rumi and Sir, laughed over something only toddlers understood. Their carefree giggles filled the room. Beyoncé moved around the kitchen in her usual effortless grace, dressed simply but radiating presence. She glanced at Blue and paused. "You ready for today?" she asked softly, placing a warm hand on her daughter's shoulder. Blue shrugged. "I guess. What if I don't fit in? What if they find out who we are?" Beyoncé crouched down so they were eye to eye. "You are not defined by our fame, baby," she said. "You are your own person, smart, kind, capable. Just be you." Blue nodded, but the weight of her last name still hung heavy on her. No matter how hard she tried, it always felt like she had to prove she was more than just Beyoncé and Jay-Z's daughter. As their car pulled into the school's drop-off zone, Blue stared at the red brick building covered in ivy. It looked like it had been there forever. She stepped out, clutching her backpack tight and trying to slow her heartbeat. Inside, the hallways buzzed with noise, students shouting, lockers slamming, the scent of fresh floor wax mixing with paper and ink. Blue found the front office, picked up her schedule, and headed to homeroom. When she walked in, conversations dipped for just a moment as heads turned. She picked a seat in the middle of the room, close enough to stay included, far enough not to stand out. A few minutes later, the classroom door opened and in walked a woman with a presence so sharp the room fell instantly silent. This was Mrs. Hudson, the new literature teacher. Tall, stern, and wrapped in a no-nonsense bun of gray hair, her piercing eyes scanned the room like she already knew who was going to disappoint her. "Good morning," she said, voice clipped and strict. "I'm Mrs. Hudson. I expect respect, effort, and excellence. I do not tolerate laziness." Blue shivered. From day one, Mrs. Hudson seemed to have it out for her. During a discussion on To Kill a Mockingbird, Blue offered her thoughts on a character's motivations. Mrs. Hudson cut her off. "Not quite," she snapped. "Your interpretation lacks depth. Maybe spend less time daydreaming." A few kids chuckled. Blue's face burned. But she stayed quiet. Over the next few weeks, the pattern repeated. Mrs. Hudson would ask her the hardest questions, interrupt her answers, or call her out for tiny mistakes. Then came the big assignment, an essay on identity in literature. Blue poured herself into it, drawing connections between the characters and her own life. She stayed up late working on it, hopeful for a little recognition. When the papers were returned, her heart dropped. A giant red C was scribbled at the top. Below it, superficial. I expected more effort. Blue stared at the page. She knew it was good. Her parents had always taught her to speak from the heart, and she had. But Mrs. Hudson's words made her question everything. That night, Blue tried to hide how crushed she felt, but Beyoncé noticed. "How was your day, sweetheart?" A teacher bullies Blue Ivy Carter, but when Beyoncé finds out, everything changes. Make sure you're subscribed, and let us know in the comments where you're tuning in from. That evening, as the soft glow of the living room lamp flickered over their cozy corner of the couch, Beyoncé put down her book and glanced at her daughter. Blue had been unusually quiet. "Talk to me," Beyoncé said, turning toward her. "I know something's on your mind." Blue hesitated, then let out a tired sigh. "It's my teacher. No matter what I do, it's never good enough. She's always criticizing me, even when I really try." Beyoncé's eyes softened. She reached out and gently brushed a strand of hair from Blue's face. Sometimes people carry their own fears and insecurities, she said, and they project them onto others. But don't ever let anyone make you feel small. You're brilliant, Blue. Don't forget that. Blue nodded, feeling a flicker of comfort, but the anxiety didn't fully leave her. Because tomorrow, she'd have to face Mrs. Hudson again. The next morning, she stepped back into the classroom with quiet determination. Mrs. Hudson was already there, arranging papers with sharp precision. She looked up just long enough to offer a tight, unreadable smile. "Good morning, Miss Carter," she said, her tone flat, maybe even cold. "Good morning," Blue replied softly, slipping into her seat. The lesson started, and Blue stayed laser-focused, determined to prove herself. But no matter how well she prepared, Mrs. Hudson always seemed to find a way to cut her down. A wrong word. A missed detail. A dismissive comment. By the end of the day, Blue was emotionally drained. The sound of dry autumn leaves crunching under her shoes as she walked home became her only comfort. She knew something had to change, but she didn't know how yet. All she knew was she couldn't keep letting this woman define her. It became a daily struggle. Each morning, Blue approached the school with a mix of courage and dread. She wasn't trying to be better than anyone, she just wanted to be treated fairly. But Mrs. Hudson seemed determined to break her spirit. It started with subtle digs, tiny remarks that seemed harmless on the surface. But Blue could feel the sting. One day, during a poetry discussion, Mrs. Hudson asked her to analyze a stanza. Blue had stayed up late studying, crafting her thoughts carefully. But before she could even finish her answer, the teacher cut her off. "Miss Carter, your interpretation is overly simplistic. Did you even read the poem, or are you just repeating something you Googled?" The class went still. Blue's cheeks flushed. I read it," she said quietly. "Then I suggest you read it again," Mrs. Hudson replied coolly, turning away. Whispers floated around the room. A few kids smirked. Blue shrank in her seat, wishing she could vanish. At first, the other students hadn't paid her much attention. But now, Mrs. Hudson's behavior had made her a target. During lunch, one boy called out, "Hey Blue, what's it like being named after a crayon?" Laughter erupted. Blue forced a smile and looked down at her tray. During a group project, a girl leaned in and whispered, "Why does Mrs. Hudson hate you? Did you, do something to her?" Blue shook her head. "I don't know," she murmured. "Maybe she thinks you're too good for us," the girl said with a half shrug. That hit deeper than Blue wanted to admit. It wasn't just about the teacher anymore. The kids were starting to see her as someone they could mock, someone who wouldn't fight back. And Blue knew, if she did speak up, it would only bring more attention. Not just to her, but to the secret she was trying so hard to protect. At home, she kept pretending everything was fine. She didn't want to add to her mother's worries, especially with Beyoncé juggling tours, meetings, and family life. But Beyoncé knew her daughter. And one evening, as they sat together again in that same warm corner of the living room, she saw right through the act. "Blue," she asked softly, "is everything okay?" Blue nodded automatically. "I'm fine." "You don't seem fine," Beyoncé replied gently, but with that steady mom energy that saw through every lie. "You know you can talk to me about anything, right?" Blue's defenses cracked. "It's school," she whispered. "Mrs. Hudson, she's always picking on me. And now some of the kids are too. I don't even know why. I didn't do anything." Beyoncé's jaw tensed, but her voice stayed calm. "I'm sorry you're going through this, baby." And in that moment, something shifted. Because Beyoncé wasn't just listening, she was planning her next move. She tried everything to stay quiet, but when Blue Ivy Carter is finally pushed too far, the moment becomes unforgettable. If you haven't already, hit that subscribe button. And tell us in the comments, would you have spoken up? You're stronger than you think. That's what Beyoncé had told her. And in that moment, Blue believed her, at least a little. But the knot in her stomach never really left. because no matter how much strength she tried to find, the daily humiliation at school kept chipping away at her. The breaking point came during an essay assignment. Mrs. Hudson had asked the class to write about a defining moment in their lives. Blue poured her soul into it, describing a summer trip to New Orleans, the heartbeat of music in the streets, the rich culture, the joy of connecting with her roots. It was raw, real, one of the best things she'd ever written. But when the graded papers were handed back, Blue felt her heart drop. A giant red C screamed from the top of the page. Below it, "Your writing lacks depth." I expected more effort. She stared at the words in disbelief. She knew she had given it everything. As she sat frozen in her seat, a boy named Jake walked past and muttered just loud enough, "Looks like someone's not the teacher's favorite." Blue clenched her fists. She wanted to speak, to defend herself, to scream. But all she could do was bite her tongue. Then came the group presentation. Her team had spent weeks preparing a creative skit from Romeo and Juliet, and despite her nerves, Blue had stepped into the role of Juliet. They rehearsed, rewrote, gave it their all. When the performance ended, the room erupted in applause. Except Mrs. Hudson didn't even clap. She stood there, arms folded, expression unreadable. "Interesting interpretation," she said flatly. "But your delivery was unconvincing, Miss Carter. Perhaps acting isn't your forte." The words echoed louder than the applause. Blue sank into her seat, each whisper around her slicing deeper. "She's so bad," someone whispered. "Guess being famous doesn't mean you're talented," another added. Blue felt her eyes sting, but she refused to let them see her cry. That night, she sat on her bed, staring at that essay. The red mark on the page looked less like a grade and more like a personal attack. She wanted to believe her mom's words, that she was strong. But how do you feel strong when everything's working against you? She opened the playlist her mom had made for her. Songs meant to lift her up. She pressed play. And as halo filled the room, she closed her eyes and let it wash over her. For a moment, she felt okay. But as the final notes faded, the weight returned. Tomorrow, she'd have to face Mrs. Hudson again. And Blue wasn't sure how much longer she could pretend she was fine. The next morning, the heaviness still clung to her as she walked into the kitchen. Beyoncé was already there, radiant as always, placing breakfast on the table. "Good morning, sweetheart," she said gently. "Morning," Blue mumbled, sliding into her chair. Her mom didn't press. She just gave her space, knowing her daughter would speak when she was ready. But school felt colder than ever. The glances, the whispers, the quiet conversations that stopped whenever Blue walked by. She tried to ignore it, kept her head down, focused on the scuffed tiles beneath her shoes as she made her way to class. But as she sat down, she caught a voice behind her. "Did you hear? I think she's, like, famous or something. Her parents. She doesn't act like it, though," someone else said. Blue froze. Her breath caught. Her fingers tightened around her backpack strap. Someone knew. Despite everything she'd done to keep it quiet, the secret was out. And now it was spreading. At lunch, it only got worse. As she tried to find a quiet table, a group of girls nearby burst into laughter. "Hey, Blue," one called out, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "So when's your next big concert? Or are you just living in your mom's shadow?" Blue's face went pale. She set her tray down slowly, hands trembling. There was no need to ask how they found out. It didn't matter anymore. They knew. And they were enjoying every second of it. But the final blow came during literature class. Mrs. Hudson stood at the front of the room, arms crossed, eyes scanning the students like a hawk. And then, they landed on Blue. Her lips curled into a faint, almost cruel smile. The moment Blue Ivy was publicly humiliated by her teacher, and the quiet strength that followed. Hit subscribe if you haven't already, and tell us in the comments, have you ever had to prove people wrong just to be heard? Miss Carter, Mrs. Hudson said, her voice cutting through the classroom like a blade. Her lips curled into a thin smile, but there was nothing kind behind it. Perhaps you can enlighten the class with your background. I'm sure someone like you has profound insights to share. Blue's stomach twisted. She could feel every pair of eyes on her. The weight of their stares. Their curiosity. Their judgment. I don't know, she whispered, her voice cracking under pressure. Mrs. Hudson's smile widened. A pity, she said coolly. I had higher expectations for someone with your upbringing. Laughter broke out across the classroom. Blue's face flushed with humiliation. She sat frozen, unable to move, the words echoing in her mind like thunder. That evening, she couldn't hold it in anymore. Tears streamed down her face as she curled up beside her mother on the couch. She let it all out, the comments, the cruelty, the endless jabs from Mrs. Hudson. And now, her secret was out. The whole school knew. They all know, Mom, she cried. And now they won't leave me alone. Mrs. Hudson hates me, and the kids, they think I'm just some spoiled brat who doesn't belong. Beyoncé pulled her close, wrapping her arms around her daughter like a shield. Oh, Blue, she whispered, gently stroking her hair. I'm so sorry you're going through this. But you are not alone. We'll figure this out. Together. But how? Blue asked, her voice shaking. They've already made up their minds about me. Beyoncé leaned back and looked into her daughter's eyes. You can't control what they think, she said. But you can control how you respond. And I know you have the strength to rise above all of this. Blue nodded, her mom's words planting a tiny seed of hope. But the road ahead still felt long. The next morning, she returned to school with quiet determination. She avoided the whispers, ignored the side eyes, kept her head down in the cafeteria. But it was clear, this wasn't going away. A crowd of students had gathered around a phone, laughing. Blue didn't need to see it to know. Someone had found a photo of her with her parents and shared it across the school. Looks like little Miss Carter's got some famous friends, a boy sneered. Too bad none of that rubbed off on her brain. Blue clenched her jaw. Don't react, she told herself. Don't give them what they want. But the hits kept coming. In literature class, Mrs. Hudson launched into a lesson about privilege. And then, without even trying to hide it, turned her gaze toward Blue. Some people are born with every advantage, she said. But that doesn't mean they know how to use them. The room went quiet. Blue felt her throat tighten. But this time, no tears. She funneled the frustration into her work. She stayed late in the library. Read more. Wrote more. And slowly, a quiet fire began to burn inside her. At home, Beyoncé sat her down. There's a school-wide essay contest coming up, she said. This could be your chance, Blue. A chance to tell your story. To remind them, and yourself, who you really are. I'll help you if you want, she added. But this has to come from your heart. Blue nodded. Her resolve was growing. She wasn't going to let rumors, ridicule, or even a bitter teacher define her. This time, she'd speak for herself. That night, she sat at her desk, pen in hand, staring at the blank page. The first few lines were rough. She crossed them out. Started again. Then again. Nothing sounded right. Everything she wrote felt too safe, or too raw. She sighed, closing the notebook and resting her head on the desk. All that confidence had slipped away again. Downstairs, Beyoncé was tidying up when she heard the faint sound of Blue's chair scraping back. A few moments later, Blue appeared in the doorway, shoulders low, eyes tired. Can't sleep? Beyoncé asked gently, setting down her book. Blue shook her head and curled up next to her mom on the couch. They sat in silence for a while. Beyoncé didn't push, she knew her daughter needed time. Finally, Blue spoke. I don't know what to write. Blue Ivy had always felt like she was living in someone else's story until she wrote her own. If this story is speaking to you, hit that like button and let us know in the comments, what would your story be about? Every time I try to write, Blue whispered, it just feels wrong. Like I'm trying to prove something instead of just telling the truth. Beyoncé sat quietly for a moment, then asked softly, what truth do you want to tell? Blue hesitated. I want people to understand me, she said. Not as your daughter. Not as dad's. Just as me. But I don't even know who that is sometimes. Beyoncé reached across the couch and gently took her daughter's hand. Blue, it's okay to feel that way, she said. Finding out who you are, it's a journey. And you're still at the beginning. But the fact that you want to be seen for who you are, that's bravery, my love. Blue looked up, her eyes brimming with tears. But what if they never see me that way? What if all they ever see is the name? Then you show them who you are, Beyoncé said, her voice steady. Not with anger. Not to prove a point. Just with honesty. That's your power. Your story belongs to you, and no one can take that from you. Blue nodded slowly. Something inside her shifted. That night, she leaned against her mother's shoulder and let herself feel the warmth of that small, growing spark of hope. The next morning, she woke up with a clearer head. She went straight to her desk, opened a clean page in her notebook, and began to write. This time, the words came. They didn't rush. They didn't fight her. They flowed. She wrote about how books had always been her safe space, how they let her escape, dream, breathe. She wrote about the pressure of living up to a legacy she never asked for. About being judged before she ever said a word. About how badly she wanted to be seen, not as a celebrity's child, but as her own person. With her own thoughts. Her own voice. By the time she finished, the sun was high in the sky. Her hand ached. But her heart felt light. It wasn't perfect. But it was real. And for the first time in weeks, that felt like enough. Later that day, she handed the pages to her mom. Beyoncé read in silence. Her face gave nothing away. Then she looked up, her eyes glassy with emotion. This is beautiful, she said, her voice thick. It's honest. It's raw. It shows so much of who you are. I'm so proud of you. Blue felt something warm spread through her chest. Do you think it's enough to win? She asked. Winning doesn't matter, Beyoncé replied. Telling your story, that's the win. Over the next few nights, they worked together at the dining table. Paper everywhere, tea mugs forgotten, midnight creeping past without notice. Beyoncé offered suggestions, but never rewrote her. She always said, make sure it still sounds like you. During one of those quiet sessions, Beyoncé shared something Blue had never heard before. She told her daughter about a time early in her career when the criticism was louder than the applause. When people doubted her, mocked her, tried to fit her into a box she didn't belong in. I had to learn to take the pain, she said, and turn it into music. Into something powerful. Something mine. She looked at Blue. That's what you've done with this essay. Blue sat quietly, listening, absorbing every word. For so long, she had seen her mom as unstoppable, untouchable, larger than life. But in that moment, she didn't just see Beyoncé the icon. She saw Beyoncé the woman. Her mother. And maybe, for the first time, she saw a piece of herself in her too. She started the year in silence, overshadowed, underestimated, but by the end, Blue Ivy Carter had become a voice the whole school couldn't ignore. If this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more powerful true-to-life stories. And hey, drop a comment below. What would your voice say if the world was finally ready to listen? She had always seen her mom as untouchable. Perfect. Like nothing could ever shake her. But sitting on that couch, hearing Beyoncé talk about her own struggles, Blue saw her differently. Not just as an icon, but as a person. someone who had been through it and come out stronger. As the day of the essay contest approached, Blue felt a mix of nerves and something she hadn't felt in a long time, excitement. She practiced in front of her family, her voice shaky at first, then stronger with every run-through. Jay-Z gave her a big thumbs up and said, "You got this, baby girl. They're not ready for what you're about to bring." Blue laughed. And for the first time, she believed him. That morning, she stood in front of the mirror, smoothing her hair and repeating her first line under her breath. Fear still lingered, but she pushed it aside. This was her moment. And she wasn't about to let it pass her by. In the auditorium, her hands trembled as she held her essay. But then she spotted her mother in the crowd. Beyoncé smiled and mouthed, "You've got this." Blue took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage. The lights were bright. The room was silent. She unfolded the paper and began to speak. Her voice didn't shake. She spoke of books and dreams, of judgment and pressure, of trying to find her place in a world that had already decided who she was supposed to be. When she finished, the room stayed quiet for a second and then erupted into applause. As she stepped off the stage, Beyoncé pulled her into a tight hug. "I'm so proud of you," she whispered. "You were incredible." And for the first time, Blue felt it. She had been seen, not as Beyoncé's daughter, but as herself. Not everyone clapped, though. Near the back, Mrs. Hudson sat with her arms crossed, her face unreadable. For a moment, their eyes met. Cold. Tight-lipped. But Blue didn't flinch. That afternoon, students who had once ignored her now offered smiles and praise. Others, like Jake and Emily, kept their distance. Their glances said everything. But Blue? She walked tall. The next day, she entered class with her head high. Mrs. Hudson glanced up, eyes narrowing just slightly, but said nothing. The lesson that day was on critical thinking. Mrs. Hudson's voice was sharp, deliberate. "True insight," she said, eyes flicking toward Blue, "requires more than surface-level observation. It requires depth, nuance, the courage to challenge assumptions." Blue gripped her pen. She knew that was for her. But she didn't take the bait. Not this time. By lunch, that first wave of confidence had given way to frustration. The cold stares. The silence. The feeling that no matter what she did, it would never be enough. That's when Harper sat down beside her. A quiet, observant girl. Not someone Blue had ever expected to hear from. "I just wanted to say, your essay was amazing," she said, her voice low. "It really made me think about how hard it must be, growing up in the spotlight." Blue smiled, her eyes stinging with gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. Harper hesitated, then said what no one else had. "I've noticed how Mrs. Hudson treats you. It's not just you. Last year, there was a boy, Michael. Brilliant. But he didn't come from money. She used to say things, imply things. He ended up transferring schools." Blue's blood went cold. It wasn't just her. It was a pattern. And suddenly, the decision was clear. That afternoon, Blue knocked on the principal's door. Her voice trembled at first, but as she spoke, it grew stronger. She told Mr. Whitaker everything. The unfair criticism. The subtle digs. What Harper had told her. He listened. Carefully. And promised to take it seriously. And he did. The following week, Mrs. Hudson was called into a private meeting. No one knew what was said, but something shifted. Her tone softened. Her sharp edges dulled just slightly. And one afternoon, she stopped by Blue's desk. "Your essay," she said quietly, "showed promise. I may not agree with everything you wrote, but it's clear you have potential." It wasn't an apology, but it was something. Blue blinked. "Thank you," she said cautiously. She'd earned this moment not through silence, but by speaking up. And from that moment on, things began to change. The whispers in the hallways faded. Her classmates saw her differently. Not just a famous last name, but a person. A leader. A voice. Harper became a real friend. Together, they launched a campaign, Voices Together, to promote kindness, respect, and inclusivity across their school. And students showed up. Because Blue had shown up first. One afternoon, sitting in the garden, Beyoncé asked her, "How do you feel about everything?" Blue looked up at the sky, the breeze playing with her curls. "I feel free," she said. "Like I finally know who I am. And I'm okay with it." Beyoncé smiled, her eyes soft. "You've always known who you are," she said. "You just needed to see it for yourself." The next school year, Blue walked the halls not as a girl trying to blend in, but as someone who belonged. She was Blue Ivy Carter. A writer. A leader. A girl with her own story. And this was only the beginning. Thanks for watching. If this story inspired you, please share it with someone who needs to hear it. And if you're new here, subscribe for more stories that move hearts, shift perspectives, and celebrate the power of voice. We'll see you in the next one.